What's up? Welcome to Mod HR TV. I am so excited to be here today with Ephraim Olson. I always joke with him that we're like the exact opposite because I'm a college dropout. He's a Harvard grad. He's a tax attorney. I'm in HR, but it like works. Somehow I love it. So I'm so excited for you to be here. We are talking about one of like the #1 question I get these days as an HR consultant is, can I be, should I hire W-2s or should I have 1099 contractors, and what in the heck are they? So I'm super stoked to talk to him about this. We have lots of experience doing this together, so it's been a fun year. But before we dive into that, like tell us about you a little bit.
Sydney's exactly right. We do joke about this being a sort of opposite. My background, I grew up in Canada. I have a family of tax attorneys, so it's probably not like a big stretch that I ended up as a tax attorney.
I did not know that. You came family of tax attorneys.
4 of us.
Wow. Yeah. What's Thanksgiving like?
Terribly boring.
You can invite my husband and I. We'll definitely live it up for you.
No, so came down, went to Brigham Young University, got an English degree there, and then went to law school at Harvard.
That's what I'm saying.
Took a class from Brett Kavanaugh, the new Supreme Court Justice.
That was, what class was it?
It was a constitutional law, separation of powers class. So very interesting.
I always think like, well, I wish I would have been an attorney, but I just do not have the attention span to get through it. So kudos to you. That's amazing.
So did that, and then I've been practicing tax law, and like Sydney said, it's I do tax work. A lot of it is sort of business, like restructurings and like sales and sort of like high-level tax stuff. But a big thing that comes up all the time is the tax that relates to employees and contractors. So I deal with that often, and maybe similar to you, Sydney, it often comes to me when there is a problem. When there's a problem. People don't usually show up at my doorstep when they're starting, which they should.
100%.
But they show up when it's like sort of way down the road, and they say, "Uh-oh, somebody's knocking at our door. What do we do?" Yeah,
and I want to speak for some. I shouldn't speak for all HR professionals. I'll speak for myself. But I know there's like this tension between attorneys and HR sometimes, where it's like, well, you know, you don't want to completely outsource your job. I think a lot of HR people feel that way, like, oh, this attorney will come in and they can do all these we deal with a lot of the same things, right? The Department of Labor, tax issues as it relates to the company taxes for employment taxes and employee taxes. Here's my advice. Suck it up and call an attorney. If you do not know, call and ask. Because one of the things that I have learned that is, I think a lot of people don't realize, is that if you mess up on employment laws as it relates to the taxes or to the Department of Labor, you can be held personally liable for that. You can go to jail in some states if you misclassify employees. So if you don't know the answer, call an attorney. Don't try and be a hero. Just call and ask for help, right?
Well, no, I mean, that's like the biggest lesson I wish I could tell people is that, like, I've started companies, I've been around people that start companies, I've helped, you know, people that are starting companies, sell companies. I've sort of been around the sort of startup world, and I understand that people often don't have as much forethought into what they're doing when they start as they should. I understand that.
Yeah.
But at some point when you're going to start hiring somebody, don't just say, I'll push this decision off till later.
Yeah.
Because you could call me, you could call like other attorneys. It doesn't cost anything. I'm not going to charge you to sort of talk through the issue to begin with. And you can just sort of figure it out. Is this going to be a problem? And the answer might be yes, it might be no. You might have a way to say these are 1099 contractors and not have an issue.
Yeah.
But it doesn't hurt to call.
Yeah.
And it can hurt not to call.
Exactly.
It certainly can hurt not to.
And we'll dive into that, like what kind of penalties, because I think sometimes people are like, oh, the penalties aren't that bad. No, you guys, it could wipe out a startup. If you mess up on these things, if you're not paying, like you don't mess with the Department of Labor and you don't mess with Uncle Sam. Like those are your 2 finite rules. And so call and get some help. So let's start first with like, how do you identify if you are a 1099 versus a W-2 employee? Like, what are those tests look like?
So the tests are, there's like multiple tests because states have their own. Can I back up for a second?
Yeah, for sure.
So like there's 3 people that are really involved and interested on whether somebody's an employee or not.
Right. There's yeah.
Yeah. So there's the IRS. They care, and why do they care? They care because they get more money for employees than 1099 contractors.
Yeah.
So the IRS cares, the Department of Labor cares.
Well, in business taxes, you have to pay employment taxes, the company does, in addition to the employees. Yeah,
exactly.
Keep going.
So, and like self-employment taxes are lower than the combined employer taxes. So the IRS takes home more money for an employee than they do from a 1099 contractor.
Yeah, so they're
vested.
vested.
They care. The second people who care are the Department of Labor.
Right.
And they care because of the FLSA.
Yep.
And the FLSA, you know, sort of a post-Depression era piece of legislation that says that sets minimum wage,
right.
It sets overtime for employees.
Right.
And so Department of Labor is pretty good at fastidiously sort of dealing with it. And if you misclassify somebody that should have been classified as an employee, they'll come after you. So they care. And then states care. And states care because they're the ones that pick up the bill when someone goes on unemployment and files for unemployment. And, you know, and if they're employees, they have unemployment insurance.
Yep.
And if they're contractors, they don't.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, the state is the one that picks up the bill if someone was classified as a contractor but should have been classified as an employee.
Yeah.
And they will go after employers for that.
Yeah, and that's super clutch to know that you've got 3 different agencies that are after you, and you could have you could have the Department of Labor come after you for something and then not the IRS, or the IRS and not the other. So we'll dive into that a little bit more, but there are 3 vested government programs, I guess, would you say, government? Agencies, yeah, there's the word. Agencies that are really gonna come for you if you don't get this right. So I work with a lot of startups, I know you do too, so startups or small businesses. A lot of times people will say, okay, well, we're just going to hire a 1099 contractor because we really don't have enough work and they're just doing a little bit. So let's talk about that. When you're a startup, you're a small business, how do you know if you should bring someone on as a 1099 contractor, kind of outsource, we're really in that gig economy, or do I have to do it as a W-2? Like, what advice would you give to those people?
One thing that people have to understand is what the test is between an employee and a contractor.
Yeah, now that we know those 3 agencies, the test.
I can't give you legal advice because I don't know your facts, but I can tell you sort of in broad outlines what the law is.
Right.
And most of it deals with control. So each agency, each of the 3 agencies that are involved have their own tests a little bit. And then there's separately a common law test that decides whether someone's an employee or contractor for stuff like liability, like, you know, if your employee gets in an accident, can they sue you? So there's a sort of a common law test for that. But these 3 agencies have their own tests that have been interpreted by courts, and they're pretty well established now. And most of it has to do with control.
Right.
So if you're the one that tells the people where to show up to work, and you tell them when to show up to work, and you're paying them by the hour or by the day or by the week or by the month, and if the relationship is going to be long-lasting, and if you're the one that provides the tools for them, and if you tell them how to do the job and not what the end result is, then they're going to be employees. That sort of all pushes it towards an employee.
Things like paying through the payroll system.
Yep.
So if you're going to push more towards the employee if we're assigning your shifts, you know, things like that, or whose computer when you're talking about that, or even the systems, right? Especially if it's a system, you can say, okay, well, they have their own computer that they're using, but maybe they're an accountant in accounting, and this system, the main accounting system, is what they do 100% of their work on, and that's provided by the company. Well, then again, you're going to push a little bit more towards the employee side, even though they have their own computer, right? They have to do their work on this system. So those are kind of little more like little examples.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, it's a spectrum, right? There's sometimes in the middle, it's hard to determine exactly where someone is, but on the spectrum of employee to contractor, someone that shows up at your office and you provide the tools and you pay them by the hour and you have a handbook and you tell them what you can and can't do and you tell them all the stuff, that, and you have a sort of a open-ended contract for them to come and work at your office doing accounting work or doing whatever, that will be very likely an employee, just in the sense that, like, there are exceptions if they're high-paid individuals. There's a lot of nuances to the law, but as a general rule, if you have someone coming to your office and they're doing the work and they're not under one of these exceptions, they're likely going to be an employee. On the other side, what they're looking for is people that are independently in business for themselves. So I'm going to change the roof on my house. I'm going to hire somebody to come and they provide the tools, they provide the whatever. Yeah, maybe I'm going to pay for the roof ultimately, but they're the ones that have the truck and the ladders and the whatever else and the and they put the roof in, and it's a one-time gig, and I don't tell them that they can or can't walk on this side of the house or on that side of the roof, and they do or don't have to show up at 9 in the morning.
Yeah, you don't give them training for how to put the roof on. You hire them expecting them to know that they know how to do it.
They're supposed to have the licenses, they're supposed to know the rules.
The insurance.
They're supposed to do it all on their own. You're not the only client they have.
Right.
So they go to other people's houses, they come to yours for a bit, you give the end result, you pay them, you know, they go away. That is likely an independent contractor because the control you had over them is very minimal. And like I say, if you're the only client that this person has, that's likely going to be an employee. So even if they were the roofer and I had 100 miles of roof to put in, and I employed them every day, and I told them that they had to, you know, follow certain safety rules, and I gave them trainings, and I provided their insurance for them, and I provided the trucks, and I provided the harnesses, and I provided the stuff. Like at some point, that relationship that was going to be an independent contractor relationship is going to move towards an employee relationship because it's a control thing. How much control do you have on the day-to-day activities? Yeah,
so one of the things I run into with people all of the time, and correct me if I'm sure that you get this too, they'll say, okay, well, yes, you know, maybe I do provide X, Y, and Z, so the control maybe be there, but we agreed, the employee and I, that that's a 1099 contract relationship, and they signed the 1099 contractor, so I think I'm good, I'm covered. That doesn't matter. Your contract with the Department of Labor and the IRS, they don't care about what contract. If they did, then everybody would put them on a contract and say, oh, my employee signed it. It doesn't matter. They're there to, you know, provide, you know, the checks and balances on the employee side. So even though you have a 1099, you know, you have this worker sign a contract that says they're a 1099, if the control is still there, it won't matter. It won't matter what they sign.
And I'll just make it like a small point on that. So like, that's absolutely true. They do look at the contract though.
Right.
If you call them employees, that's going to count against you if you later claim that they're independent contractors.
Right.
But just saying they're contractors doesn't make them so. So they do look at the contracts. They do look at all of this stuff.
Right.
But saying it doesn't make it so.
Yes. So if you sign a 1099, we've seen this, they'll sign a 1099 contractor. Everything in the contract says that they're a contractor, but then they also sign onboarding documentation that refers to them as an employee. Yeah. So then, you know, again, it's contradicting. Where are you at? And you would think, I mean, it happens quite frequently. It happens all the time.
Well, the other thing to think about too is not only do you have the, like, do they not look at the contract or whatever, but understanding like a little bit why also helps, which is employers almost always have a power advantage over employees, right?
Clutch. So,
and again, this came out of 1938 when the FLSA came into you know, sort of was passed, that that they understand that employers have a lot of clout. And so you can force an employee to take or leave a contract, and they might take it even if they don't believe they're actually a contractor. I'm not saying that that's not what your situation is, but the reality is they police for that, and they just say, I understand what you guys say you came to, and I understand the agreement you came to, but we're looking beyond that. Yeah. And if you are actually an employee, we've got to like enforce the law that you've got to pay all the rules, and you've got to pay all the fines, and you've got to do the stuff that would be required of an employee.
Yeah, so I think that is a perfect, so a lot of our clients are starting, they're small businesses, or they've been in business and they're growing. And so my question is, and that's usually who's got a lot of 1099 contractors. I shouldn't say usually, I mean, a lot of people do, but we see that quite frequently, right? So how do you know when you're in that growth phase, the first few years, do I hire W-2? I mean, it can be more expensive. Is it 1099 contractors? What can I do? So, you know, you're just kicking off, or you know, you're in that position. What would you tell those people?
Again, like the one thing I would be, the most important thing I could say is go talk to someone, right? Go talk to a lawyer, go talk to an HR consultant, talk to Sydney. But the reality is, like, talk to someone early, because the cost is going to be so low compared to getting it wrong. Right. And even having to change midstream, right? The cost of having to change when you have 7 employees or 25 employees or 300 employees is going to be dramatically more expensive per employee than when you have 2 employees or 1 employee. So figure it out. Talk to someone, get the advice, because even if they are contractors, I mean, this is the other thing. Even if you're contractors, make sure that you do the rest of the stuff so they stay contractors, right? Mm-hmm. I have a client, I've had people approach me who probably had an independent contractor relationship with their employees. Mm-hmm. But they didn't know that. So they called them employees in the contract. and they pay, you know, there's a few things that they could tweak that would probably help them make the case that they're independent contractors.
Right.
But they didn't know to do that. And so now that there's somebody knocking at their door, they're in a bit of a jam that they might have to pay out as employees, even though they could have paid out as contractors if they'd got all of their ducks in a row early on.
Right. So those situations, it's ask somebody. So now let's say we have someone they've asked, they've figured out, or they went on that, you know, those different websites, different agency websites, which we can link below. They've done the test. They said, okay, I have them misclassified one way, or well, I guess you're going to get the most in trouble if they're 1099s and they should be W-2s. So people, I get this question. It's two-part. And I think they go hand in hand because then they understand how serious this is. What are the chances that any of these agencies are going to come and knock on my door for real? And, you know, how bad is it if they do come knocking? So let's talk about that. How often does it really happen that you get an audit?
Well, so again, there's 3 agencies that could do this.
Right.
The IRS, you know, they'll audit you as they, whatever, you know, that happens or doesn't happen. I don't know that there's any extra audit risk that there wasn't before, although the Biden administration is putting like $80 billion towards audits for the IRS. So, you know, it probably goes up, but that shouldn't be the analysis. But like, even if it was, you know, even if you're going to use that, IRS is what it is. It's the Department of Labor, and more especially the states, that are like, it's COVID times, and they've lost a lot of revenue. They've lost a lot of tax, they've lost a lot of hotel taxes, they've lost a lot of revenue, and they've had huge expenses. And so there's articles almost every day in the newspaper that states are going aggressively after getting their taxes, and that audits of the contractor-employee question will be increasing. That's certainly the sort of trend I've read in my profession, is that trend is going up. And so the audit risk is going to go up almost certainly. And again, why take that risk? Because it doesn't cost that much. If you have to do employees, then do employees and pay it and bake it into the cost. So you're not running a business that's running a loss, right? Like, bake it into the cost right up front so you know what it's going to be, so you know how you have to charge, what you have to charge your customers. Because you might get down the road 3 or 4 years and then realize that you should have had employees instead of contractors. And then there's going to be a $2 million bill.
Yes, and we mean that. So let's talk about those fees. Because what will happen, you owe those 3 different agencies. And with the Department of Labor, this is one example. If those contractors were working, let's say 45 hours a week for the last year and a half, and now you're in trouble, you're going to have to, like, you talk about the fees, but I mean, you'll have to pay back that overtime plus additional fees. Like,
liquidated damages.
Yes.
So Department of Labor, it's good, because that's usually one that can sort of bankrupt someone. Like,
yes, I think that's where I usually see people getting in trouble right off the bat, is because they've had an employee that went and filed for unemployment. And then the company comes back and says, well, no, they were a 1099 contractor. And then the employee that filed is like, I don't think so. And then that triggers them to do an investigation. So that's,
So a couple of things. One is what the penalties are. The penalties are, at the Department of Labor, you are required to pay minimum wage and overtime.
Right.
Overtime is any time over 40 hours in a week that's been worked. And sometimes people work 60 hours a week, right? Like some of these startups and stuff, like you're working long hours, but it's time and a half. So you find their base pay, everything you've been paying them for the whatever, for hours, you like find their base pay, and then it's time and a half is overtime for any hours over 40 worked. And then there's liquidated damages, which doubles that. So it goes back 2 years normally, but if it's like willful, like if you knew or should have known that these were employees, then it goes back 3 years. So like we're talking, like if you have 10 employees and they're working long hours doing their thing and you're paying them good salaries, you might owe like twice what you paid out.
Yep.
Like it's a huge number, and it just doesn't make sense to go down that road.
Yeah, it can bankrupt you, right? So make sure that you get this done correctly.
But can I just, one other thing?
Yeah.
So the Department of Labor, they can also go after you individually. If you're someone that controlled, like the employer is not just the person that's on the paper. It's the person that like actually exerted control.
Yes.
So if you or your controller or your director were out there.
Your HR director, you know, you're supposed to know what is different. You can go to jail.
Well, they can sue you personally. You can personally be liable for that. So it's not like you can sit behind a shell company and say like they're not going to come after you. They can come after you personally. And then you have the IRS, which can have like a big number. It can be like 20 or 30% or more of what they've paid, or it could be a big number of what you paid, late filing fees and penalties and everything else.
Right.
And then the states, in some ways, that's the scariest because each state is different, obviously, and there's quite a few different things. It's workers' compensation, it's unemployment insurance and stuff like that. But some of them, many of them are criminal. That if you do this, if you misclassify somebody, you can be subject personally to criminal liability.
Yeah.
And so that's the one, again, nobody wants to get into any of these things wrong. But I just, every piece of evidence says don't make this mistake. Call somebody, fix it up front, because it will always be cheaper to fix it up front than to fix it later.
So let's talk about that now that we have thoroughly scared our viewers into doing this. Let's talk about, if you self-identify that, hey, we've made a mistake as a company, there are some ways to go about this strategically and the right way to kind of get yourself out of this hole. So like what programs are available?
Yeah, so the audits often happen from somebody like going for unemployment insurance, or someone gets injured on the job, they try to get workers' compensation, and then even if they say like, whoops, I forgot that I was a contractor, like I'm withdrawing my thing, the state could still come after you and say, no, our job is to police to make sure that people who are supposed to be classified as employees are classified as employees. So they'll come after you. And that's not a good time to go looking for answers. Right, that's the time that people usually come to me. It's sort of like, hey,
they come to me, and then I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna need to tap somebody, and that's a little bit over my pay grade.
So they come to me at that point, and they say, what do we do to respond to this? And there are ways to respond. Like I say, always better. The earlier you get someone involved, the better off you'll be.
Right.
But the better way to do it is if you're watching this and saying, hey, it's not clear, or maybe these probably are employees, and I should change what I'm doing. Talk to me. I mean, talk to somebody. Call somebody. Talk to Sydney. Talk to somebody and say, how do I get out of this? And it's going to be a bit of a challenge. It'll be a little bit expensive, but way less expensive than when someone's knocking at your door. Yeah,
so let's talk about that, because the government offers those programs. Yeah. There are some like, hey, whoops, I messed up. How do I get out of this?
So the IRS especially, the IRS has like ways that as long as you're not under audit and they didn't come to you, you can like wipe away most of these penalties by voluntarily coming forward for like a couple of % of what you paid. So it's like actually pretty small. It's like 10% or 2% of what you would otherwise pay in penalties if it like built up on its own.
Yes.
And then Department of Labor, again, that only goes back 2 years if it's not willful and 3 years if it is willful. So if you fix it, I mean, there are other ways to sort of fix it, and like sometimes you do have to sort of come forward and fix it. But even still, if you stop it now, then going forward, every month that goes on is one more month that falls off the table that you might be sort of liable for, right? So the earlier you fix it, the less penalties there'll be on the Department of Labor side. And then like states are different, each state's different. Many states have some sort of a voluntary program that you want. If you come in voluntarily, the penalties will be less, or there'll be no penalties, or they'll waive it for the first time offense, or something like that. So like I say, I can't give advice on that, but if you sort of get all the facts down and figure out what state you're in and what your exposure is, there's almost every, like there's a lot of ways to have it come forward that are going to be much, much cheaper. Yeah, they'll work with you. You can get to the other side of it. And then, you can kind of have a clean break, right? Like you can move forward. It doesn't need to be crippling. Like, yes, we've got this wrong and we're going to go forward from there. And again, just think about it, right? Like someone gets injured on the job. They get injured yesterday when you're calling them contractors. That's a problem. If they get injured tomorrow after you fixed it, well, then they're already on workers' comp. So that like, even though that they could have been injured in the past, you sort of like dodged a bullet. But going forward, if they get injured or if they get let go, then they're employees. They can get workers' comp. And you don't have to, like, the headache, like the way to do it is to fix it early. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that this has been fantastic, super helpful for all of our clients out there, both of us and anyone who is kind of struggling with 1099s versus W-2s. We'll put all of our information below and links so that if you have any questions, you can call us. I hope that we have thoroughly scared people into saying, I need to analyze this for my business, because we don't want that to be the one thing that takes you down, right? There's so many other things that you can focus on and get right so that your business can excel, and that can be detrimental. So thank you, Ephraim, for coming. It is such a pleasure. I love working with you. I love our polar opposites. It's always so much fun. We'll see you next time.